Don't forget we have our YouTube channel. If you've missed any of our past sessions, you can watch those recordings on YouTube. There is a link, of course, in your handout as well. A reminder that we're now closed at the library. So as of yesterday was our last day open while we work to move downtown. So we still don't have a reopening date at this point, but stay tuned to our website, apl.org, for all the latest news on when we're going to reopen. If you're going to continue your conversation, could you please leave? Because it's kind of distracting. All right, we started now. So if you're going to continue your conversation, you need to leave. So we will be reachable by phone during the closure. So you can give us a call on our reference phone line Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Or of course, email and we'll get back to you because we are still working during the closure, even though we don't have a physical space as we start the move back downtown. So today we're going to talk all about land records. Yes.
Just have a quick question about the library closing.
Yes.
I have some books. Can they be returned during all of this?
Yes. So the book drop that's outside of the temporary location will be available till the end of the year, or you can also return them to other InfoSoup libraries like Kimberly, Kaukauna, Little Chute. Those libraries still, of course, will be open and operational the regular hours. So you can feel free to use those libraries in the meantime.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions about the library closure before we get started? All right. See a couple of questions in the chat. We do not have the 2025 schedule out yet, so stay tuned. Part of it depends on when the library reopens, so stay tuned for that. Again, stay tuned to apl.org. That's where we're going to announce it, or the monthly newsletter. So that's another great place to sign up. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, I send it out once a month, usually the first week of the month. Where I let you know what upcoming programs we have or what kind of news and things are going on. So that's another way to stay informed. All right. Yes, did you have a question? Okay. All right, so land records. So first we're going to talk about why you should use land records, because maybe you haven't thought like, hey, I should use land records in my genealogy research. So land records, in terms of genealogy, are some of the oldest records available. So of course, for those ancestors who have been here for a really long time, we want to find them in all of the records, but sometimes all of the records aren't available. Like we've talked about in our past sessions, you know, there weren't vital records up until a certain point. So, you know, you don't have those types of records. Whereas land records, they go back pretty far. For our ancestors, about 9 out of 10 of the adult males in the United States before 1850 owned land. So with those kind of odds, it's a good chance that you're going to find those male ancestors through land records if they were in the US by this time. Of course, owning land was a huge motivation for our ancestors to come from a different country to the United States because they wanted to own land. It was also the reason why they started moving west, of course, and why the United States expanded as it continued westward. Land records, of course, are important because they put our ancestors in a specific place at a specific time, which will help lead you to further research. So now you know where they were and what time they were in that location. So you can look to see if there's church records or court records or other types of records available for them in that time period in that location. You also have a very, very specific location of where your ancestor lived. So now you can see where the nearby churches were, where the schools were, where the cemeteries were, and use historic maps or city directories to learn more about their neighborhood, where they lived and where they conducted business, things like that. You could even visit the land that they own today and go walk on the same land that your ancestor owned. Or if it's not possible for you to go for a physical visit, you can use something like Google Earth or Google Maps to see what it looks like today. So that's something you can go to Google Earth and type in an address, and it will bring you to that specific area. Oh, why is it going to be goofy now here? Just want Google Earth. So I'll show you quick just what Google Earth looks like. I don't know why it keeps bringing me to different projects. Why? Here we go. So you can just type in a location. So for example, I can put in 225 North Oneida Street, which is the library's address, Appleton, Wisconsin. And then it will magically move me to this exact space where it is. So now I can see an overview of this neighborhood where the library is. I can zoom in and look and see, oh, this is what the library used to look like before we started our renovation, because of course this isn't, 100% live. You can actually see down here, it's from May of 2023. So it's going to show you from just over a year ago what this area looks like. So I can kind of see, oh, there's a church right here, or what else is around that area where your ancestor would have owned land. You can do the same thing with Google Maps. So that's another way you can view that neighborhood and see what things look like. It's very similar to Google Earth. It's just whatever you want to use. So again, it will pop you in there. Now you can even see, look at, there's photos of our construction going on, because this is more recent from October of 2024. So you can again kind of see at a ground level what else is around this area and what it looks like. And you can even click down here and start like walking down the street essentially, and then kind of walk down the street this way and see how things look. Sometimes it gets a little goofy. So but you can just kind of play around with it and move around downtown or wherever your ancestor would have lived with that address that you have from land records. Any questions about Google Earth or Google Maps? Yeah.
My question is, how do you pinpoint it when it just says like Gulf Stream?
Yeah, so if you don't have an actual address that it says, oh, it's 225 North Oneida, I'm going to show you in a little bit how you would take that legal land description that you might have and figure out what street it would be. Of course, you could also try to use city directories, but depending on the time period, there might not be a city directory that would have that actual address. Land records, of course, also give us some clues into the financial status of our ancestors' life. So the good and the bad, you can see how much their real estate is valued at, how much they paid for their land, things like that, how much they sold it for, things like that. You can learn how their property was acquired, who they got it from. Maybe that's a related person to them, and now you can see how they're related, or see how a father passes down land to his daughter and son-in-law or his son. And then you can see what price that land was sold at. You could, of course, also use land records to learn more about family relationships. So maybe a father takes his land that he has and divides it between his sons and sons-in-laws, and you can trace that through land records. You can also look at who's living near your ancestors and see, are they related to our ancestor? So there's potential spouses or in-laws that might be in close proximity to that person. So you could potentially find a maiden name of your female ancestor, or figure out who a daughter would have married. So always investigate those neighbors and see how they might be related. I hope my voice is going to hold out. I did go to the Packer game on Sunday, but I promise I did not cheer as loud as I would have. All right. Land records could also provide information about our ancestors' death in some cases. So perhaps you see a death date on a land transfer because somebody is dying and transferring that land. And that's something that's required after they die to transfer that land. They could also give you that little detail you might need to break through any of your research brick walls, or any of the problems that you have that, oh, I haven't been able to find this name, or connect this person to their son or to their daughter or to this uncle. So it might help be that one little piece of the puzzle that you need in order to move further in your research. So now we're going to talk through how our ancestors would have gotten land. and all the different records that you can find in regards to land records that would possibly have your ancestors in them. So starting in the colonial period, the land in the United States was distributed slightly different in each of the colonies. So some of the colonies use what's called a headright system. This is a grant of land, which was usually about 50 acres. And they gave this land in exchange for encouraging others to come to their colony and work that land. So of course, they introduced this headright system to start attracting people to settle in the colony, because in order to thrive as a colony, you need people, and people who can work and build houses and have businesses and be able to survive together. You can't just survive on your own in a whole colony. So they were trying to attract more people to settle in the United States. After this, of course, the system for distributing land in the colonies kind of changed throughout the years, depending on the different colonies and how they handled it, because it was handled at a colony level. So since each of those are different, what you need to do is look at the time and the place you're researching to understand how that land was originally going to be distributed to those early settlers. So I would recommend starting with the Family Search Wiki and searching that specific location. So we've looked at the Family Search Wiki before in our past sessions, but here is where you can look at a specific location, a specific record type, and find out more information. So for example, I could type in Rhode Island land records. Now I can see there's a whole page, Rhode Island land and property. It's going to point me to a bunch of online resources that they have. It's going to talk about those early colony records. So if your ancestor is living in this colony and is one of those kind of early settlers or among those first people, you're going to want to, look in depth into this and see what resources they have, what information they have in this wiki. And again, you can use this with any of the states, even any of the countries. If you're like, hey, I really want to learn about German land records, you can search that too. So I can type in Germany land records. And there's a spot, Germany land and property. So now I could read all about how they distribute land or how people would have gotten land or sold land in Germany to learn about land my ancestors might have owned in Germany. So after all of those colonies got settled, the United States was essentially broken into what's called federal land states or public land states and state land states. So this kind of determines how our ancestors would have originally gotten land when it was first distributed. So there's a helpful little map that will show you what is a state land state or what is a federal land state. I've also got a listing for you in your handout. So obviously a lot of the West was federal land states because, of course, as we started migrating west, the federal government was in charge of the land and was distributing the land or selling the land to the people who were interested in buying it. Pretty much everything else on the East Coast, those original 13 colonies and a couple other of those states in that area, were all state land states. So it's kind of important to know that if your ancestor was among those first settlers who would have gotten those pieces of land. Texas is just unique. That's why it's like that. Of course, Texas. All right, so again, those state land states are those original 13 colonies plus a few others, and those were primarily going to be settled before that American Revolutionary War. So they did not really have any unclaimed land to give to the United States government to then sell on to people. So if your ancestors settled here after the American Revolution, they were likely not the people who originally owned land or the first people who owned the land. And they would have obtained land a different way, perhaps through a sale. Maybe they bought it from somebody or maybe they inherited it from somebody. So just hold tight. If your ancestor wasn't, one of those people who originally owned the land, you're going to want to dive into the other land records. Federal land then means the land in which the government has the title. So the United States government is the original owner, and then they sell it to our ancestors through what's called public entry. So again, thinking back to the map, there's 30 states that are federal land states, and they kind of divide them into two different regions, Eastern and Western. And the federal government starts selling land to people beginning in 1785 with the Land Ordinance of 1785. They did this for three primary reasons. Number one, to raise revenue to help compensate for the depletions of the Revolutionary War. Of course, war is expensive. They need money to be able to replenish the United States. They wanted to grant lands in lieu of financial rewards to all those soldiers who fought in the American Revolution. So they said, hey, would you take some land instead? And then, of course, they wanted to accommodate and encourage people to expand westward because everything on the East Coast was getting pretty settled and pretty full. And those people who really wanted land and to be able to farm their land needed to go westward. So the government was trying to get rid of that land that was available westward. So when you're researching land records, it's really important to know what's called the legal description of the land that your ancestor owned. So what a legal land description does, it identifies a specific location where your ancestor would have lived. It's going to list measurements of that property so that you know what their boundaries are. And it gives you all that necessary information that you need to identify where the land is in today's terms, because it's not going to give you an address of 225 North Oneida. It's going to give you, oh, it's section such and such in township blah, 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 and range blah, blah, blah. And you don't know what all that means. So we're going to talk through it a little bit, and I'll show you how to figure out what the actual address is. So even if it's been many, many years, you can still figure out where your ancestor lived. Even if street names have changed or you don't have a street name at all, you can still figure out where that land is if you have that legal land description, which almost all of the land records you find are going to have that legal land description. So you can find that legal land description in a few spots. The easiest is looking at deeds, which is one of the record sets we're going to look at. A deed is probably one of the most popular of the land records. It's a document that transfers property from one person to another person. So when you bought your own house, you had a deed from whoever you bought it from. One important piece of the legal land description is knowing how to translate it. Because again, like I said, you're not getting an actual address of where it is. So how you translate it depends on what survey method they used when they were plotting out the land. So we're just going to quickly talk about kind of the three most common ones. There's meets and bounds, there's the rectangular government survey, and then there's the lot and block number on a plat map. Those are kind of the three most common that you're going to come across in land records. Until 1785, so if your ancestors were here before then, the majority of those land states are going to follow what's called the meets and bounds system. So meets and bounds uses compass directions. It uses distances and landmarks like trees, fences, stumps, and creeks to describe the land's boundaries. So it starts at a designated marker and then uses a series of straight lines to proceed from point to point. So an example description you might see in a land record would say, from the point on the north bank of Jones Creek, 1 mile west of Stone Bridge, northeast 400 yards to Spring Hill, then northwest to the large oak tree, then southwest to the rock at the north side of Jackson Creek, then along the north bank of the creek to the standing point. Pretty simple, right? You guys can figure out where that is, right? Sounds, very difficult and very precise, but that was kind of their survey system at this time. They didn't come up with anything better for a few years. So this is kind of a picture of what they're talking about, essentially, of what this little piece of land looks like. So you can kind of see the little drawings of where things are, where the creek is, where the rock is, Stone Bridge, all that kind of stuff. So there's also then going to be compass measurements of where specifically that location is. Yes.
In the deed that I have for relatives in New York State, they measured by chains.
They measured by chains, yeah.
And
So
it's a big chain, and they held them around apparently. And Their stats with so many chains each way.
Yeah, so they had several other survey methods sometimes or at certain points in time, depending on the location and the time period. But this might be one of the ways your ancestor was able to describe their land in a land record. The more common one that you're going to see, especially with the newer records since 1785, and what the state land states eventually switched to, is the rectangular government survey system, or they also call it the public land survey system. This is the survey type that the federal land states also use. So you might see a description like the southwest half of the northwest quarter in section 9, township 4 north, range 5 west. So sometimes you get it kind of like this little abbreviation and it translates to kind of written out. That's what it means. So it's essentially saying this is a whole township. The township is broken up into 36 sections. And then in each section, there is sections. And then you can kind of draw a little cross in between to divide it by half, divide it by half, divide it by quarter, divide it by quarter, and even divide it further and further and further as they made smaller parcels of land.
Is each township a mile by a mile? I'm sorry, section.
I believe each section is a mile by mile, but don't quote me on that. That sounds right to me. So your ancestor could have, half of this or a quarter of this or a quarter of this, depending on how much land they purchased at that time. So just as an example, I'm going to show you how you figure out a legal land description using this rectangular survey system if you're looking at a plat map. So here we have the plat of Bovina, which is in Outagamie County. It's available on our UW Digital Collections website. And so we're going to look in and we're going to zoom in. You can see there's sections here. So kind of draw an invisible rectangle around each of the sections. And you can see right in the middle, it gives you the section number. So you can see this is section 35 in this blue color. This is section 36 in the red color and section 34 in the kind of fuchsia color. So to get the legal description, you want to start with the largest and go to the smallest. So you start with the township. So usually at the top of a plat map, you'll see where it says township. So right up here, it says 23 north. Then it's going to also ask you for the range. So that's usually right there by the township as well. So 16 east is our range. Then the section. So remember the section is that whole huge square. So this whole huge square, in this example, it says section 22 right in the middle. And then there's a quarter, of course. So if we do a line down the middle and a line down the middle, this whole square down here is a quarter. Then we're going to further divide each quarter in half and in half. So we've got quarters now. So you can see here's a quarter. And then you can even divide those further by quarters. So you divide the quarter by the quarter to get quarters. So if possible, sometimes your ancestor might have owned these 40 acres, or they might have owned a whole 160 acres. It depends on how much land they had. Sometimes they even go smaller than 10 acres. So it depends on where they kind of own land and how much they wanted to own or were able to afford at that point. So we're going to look again at this Bovina plat. And we're going to see, okay, my ancestor here is N.N. Thompson. He owns 40 acres here. And so figuring this out, it's the southeast. So if you go north, east, southwest, north, east, southwest, you can see he's in the southeast quarter of the northwest quarter of section 35 in township 23 north, range 16 east. So does that make sense? So can you tell me where Jacob's land is? So we know it's section 35. We know it's township 23 north, range 16 east, but where is it in the northwest quarter of
northwest quarter of the northwest quarter.
The northwest quarter of the northwest quarter. Yes. Section 35. So it is a little difficult. I always personally draw a little box, and I do the north, east, southwest, and then I kind of draw a little, cross in the middle to kind of divide it and divide it. And then you eventually get there at that point. Or you get lucky and then you have the deed where it actually says what that legal description is. So you don't have to try to figure it all out yourself. Does that make sense on how to translate that legal land description? You also might see something called the lot in the block system, especially in more urban or suburban areas. So you'll see something like lot 4, block B of the Rolling Acres subdivision. So it's, got certain lots blocked out, and you know that it's lot 4 on this block in this certain area. There are a couple other survey systems, too many to get into, but one of the more common ones, especially in our area, Northeast Wisconsin, is also the French long lot system, which Green Bay is very popular and has the long lot. So you can see in a plat map over here, all these really long lots that Green Bay had. So this is why I always recommend you start with that Family Search Wiki, or you Google the name of the state and land history or land survey to learn more about how land is distributed in that specific state before you start trying to dive into all the land records and trying to understand all the land records, because knowing how they're laid out, how the legal descriptions are going to be written is going to help you before you start diving in and getting all confused. And of course, it's going to be different state to state, different time periods to different time periods. So questions so far before we dive into the individual types of land records and what they might explain? Yeah.
The quarterly systems that you were talking about, 40 acres, but the original meters, 50 acres that were sold, so doesn't that contradict?
You mean meets and bounds?
Yeah.
So meets and bounds and the rectangular survey system are two different survey systems. So depending on how much land your ancestor owned, it would, and determine how, that state had their surveys, would tell you how much land your ancestor owned. So if we look back at these rectangular ones, you can see some of them own 40 acres, some of them own 60 acres, some of them own 80 or 20 or 40 or, 10. Whereas when we look back at the meets and bounds, it's not saying how many acres this is, it's just giving you the coordinates of where it is. So it's not saying, oh, this is 40 acres or this is 50 acres or it's 10 acres. So you'd have to look more into that survey system if you have meets and bounds and how much land that translates to in terms of acreage. Got any online questions here? Can you put in a physical coordinate in Google Earth if you don't have an address? Possibly. I've actually not tried it in Google Earth. I don't know if anybody else has tried it in Google Earth to see if you can put that in there. PropLogix, that's where I got those handy dandy examples. Yes, it was free, completely free to the public. I just Googled it and found it and thought it was a great resource to include in here. Would tax records give clues as to how much land someone owns? Possibly, but I feel like land records, it's more, specific, whereas, okay, this is how much land they owned, showing it on a plat map or in their land records. Whereas tax records, you have to kind of figure out like, oh, they must have gotten more land because they're taxed more or something happened where they're taxed more. I personally don't have as much experience with tax records as I do with land records. So that might be a good question for somebody who knows a little bit more about tax records. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So if you're researching those state land states, again, if your ancestor was that first person who obtained the land, it's going to be different how you figure out what land records they would have in each state, because for those state land states, because they control their own land, there's going to be no national database for all of these state land states that you can search for records, because again, each state handled it differently. So again, start with that Family Search Wiki, type in Rhode Island land records, if that's the state that you're researching in, and learn more about that. And what collections will exist for that specific location online, or how you access it offline. It should usually tell you in there, if those records aren't online, here's how you access them through the Register of Deeds office or the county clerk, or however you need to access them. But again, that's only if they were the first ones to obtain the land. If they weren't, hold tight. We're talking about deeds and all those other types of records in just a second. If your ancestor lived in one of those federal land states, you're in luck, because there is a nationwide database for that. So all of those 30 states that are part of that federal land, they have a site called the Bureau of Land Management General Land Office website. So they have a lot of federal land records on there, like the land patents, which is what you would receive if you were the first person to obtain that land. They've got survey plats, they've got field notes, tract books, all these kinds of land records that shows you how this land is distributed to these people from the federal government. So we're diving into this in just a second, but I just wanted to point out a few things with a screenshot. So the main part where you're going to go is clicking on search documents, and that's where you can put in a state, you can put in a name of a person, you can put in a legal land description if you want to. And that's how you're going to find those documents. There's a couple other options here on the left-hand side. I kind of spell out what they are. There's also a great resource center up here next to that search document area, where I encourage you to go learn more about how to use the site and those different record types, because it will talk you through a little bit more in depth, like this is what a survey is, this is what a patent is, and all this kind of stuff, or how to get more information than what you see on the website. So I'll show you a quick little demo of how to find records here by searching a name. So this record, or this website, is listed in your handout, of course. And like I mentioned, you're going to want to click on where it says search documents. So right here, I can either search by location, I can pop in a state, I can put in a name of my ancestor, I can put in a legal land description if I know it, and see, oh, maybe my ancestor didn't own the land first, but I can see who was the first person to own that piece of land. So I can pop in a name over here, and I'm going to select the state of Wisconsin. And then I'm going to click search patents. So now it's going to give me those results that are specific to Wisconsin with that specific last name. And over here, I can see what that legal land description is, and what section, and what township, and range, and the little quarter and quarter piece of land that they might own, and what county it's in. So I can take a look quick and see, oh, Oconto County, yep, that's where my John Kepschel lived, or my John Keeble lived. So I know this is my ancestor that I want to look at. So I can click on this, and it will bring me in here, and I can learn a little bit more, like, oh, he purchased it from the Menasha Land Office. It was a homestead application that's how he obtained his land. So usually under authority, it's going to tell you this is how this person might have obtained the land. It's going to tell you how many acres it is. And then again, you've got a little legal land description here. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. If you click on this little map, it should kind of bring you to where that land is. Sometimes you have to zoom in. Last time I tried this, it didn't quite work very well. Let's see if it's working now. Yeah, it doesn't appear to be working. So usually it would draw like a little box around what section it is, but for some reason it's not quite working very right, which is fine, because I'll show you in a little bit how we're going to figure out what the street name is and where specifically this land is based on this legal description, because unfortunately this map doesn't always work right. But what you really want is this patent image. So you can see one of the tabs up here says patent image. And so now this is actually a land record that my ancestor would have gotten once it loads. Yes.
The spelling of the person's name. Or do we still maybe have to look at different?
You still want to look at alternative spellings because spelling is never consistent, no matter what record set you're using. I found these to be a little bit more accurate than some of the, like the census records are all over the place, but land records are a little bit closer. Well, come on and load, please. Again, technology works awesome when it works, right? Let me try refreshing, maybe that'll motivate it here. I promise you can see an actual image of it. Well, I know I have it in my presentation a little bit later when we talk about patents in just a second, so we can look at it at that point. There's also a spot that says related documents, so you can kind of see who his neighbors are. So you can look at these names and see, oh, like, look at, this is the, you know, brother-in-law or so-and-so that, you know, married his sister or something like that, or see who else is in that same little area that he's in. For some reason, it's just not loading. But I'll show you it in just a second. We're going to talk about patents in just a second, but we'll move on. I'll show you an image of it in a few slides. But when you're researching federal land, there are going to be several ways that they could have obtained land. So we just saw with John, he got it through homestead. So that's one of the options. But two ways that your ancestor could have gotten the land before it was open and available for people to purchase or get it in a different way. The first one is through private land claims. So people who lived in a territory, so like before Wisconsin officially became a state, it was part of a territory. Or if the territory was purchased or annexed by the United States, like Louisiana, Texas, Florida, those were all kind of, you know, purchased by the United States from whoever owned them. So your ancestor could have been living on that land before that transaction happened, and they had to kind of prove that they had been living on this land and had, you know, improved the land and had been here for X number of years. So they could claim, I have been here, this is my land. There's also something called preemption. So this is, again, kind of settlers who arrived prior to that official you know, person from the government coming out and saying, okay, this is section such and such, and this is where the land is. So your ancestors kind of squatting on that public land, and then they can say, hey, this is my land, I want to purchase it because I meet all the requirements, I'm a citizen, I'm over the age of 21, I'm a head of household, I can prove that I've lived here, I can prove that I've made improvements to the land, et cetera, et cetera. So if they had been there already before the federal government kind of came in, they could claim preemption. Then at that point, people were able to buy land. So of course, one of the most common ways to buy land at this point is through credit and cash sales. So of course, just like it says, land was sold on credit or with cash. So kind of during certain time periods depended on how much you paid for the land and how much land you could buy at a certain time. So at first in 1787, you could only buy it in sections of 640 acres. In 1800, you could buy it in half sections for $2 an acre, and you could purchase it on credit where you had 4 payments due within 5 years. By 1820, you could buy it at $1.25 an acre in half quarter tracts, which is 80 acres. And then they decided, hey, credit sales aren't working for us. They weren't getting their money, apparently. So they said no more credit sales. And then they kept that same price of $1.25 an acre up until the early 20th century. Unfortunately, the bad part about these credit and cash sales is they didn't generate a whole lot of records for us. There's very little details in these credit and cash sales. If you look at the files where your ancestor would have purchased them, you don't get a whole lot of detail in them. So I've got an example here for you. When one of my ancestors purchased their land, you can see, you know, just basic information, where the land is. He paid $102.65. I can see that legal land description is the west half south northwest quarter of section number 5 and township 17, range 15, containing 82 acres and 12 hundredths at $1.25 an acre. So I can see exactly how much he paid for this amount of land and who that person is that is the recorder who's selling that land or recording that this has been purchased on such and such date. So again, not a whole ton of information other than that legal land description and how much he paid and where that land is. There's also something called bounty land. So this is land that's offered as an incentive for military service. So if your ancestors served in the military from 1776 to 1855, they possibly would have obtained some bounty land. The soldier had to agree to serve a certain number of years or for the whole length of the war. The acreage that they received from the bounty land was going to be dependent on what their rank was in the war. And then the land was set aside in certain specific locations in the United States. So there were federal bounty land warrants, but some states also had their own bounty land warrants. I've got the states listed here that also gave out their own land warrants. There's going to be individual acts with bounty land that is going to tell you what kind of requirements your ancestor would have had to meet or what they would have received at such and such time. So it's really important when you're looking at that authority, what that bounty land act name or year is. So for example, if it says Bounty Land Act of 1850, that means that person would have had to be a veteran of the War of 1812 or the Indian Wars. Or if it says the Bounty Land of 1855, that was open to every veteran or heir who served since the American Revolution. So again, there's going to be lots of various acts, and depending on that act is going to tell you what they were entitled to and who was eligible to receive that bounty land. The other thing to know about bounty land is the soldiers didn't always settle on that land. Sometimes they sold it because they could make money from it, or they gave their land to a son or a daughter-in-law or son-in-law, or other people that they said, hey, you can go settle on this land, because they didn't want to move from wherever they were. So here's an example of bounty land. So you can see this really large piece of paper that just has all these names listed. You can see when they were given that land, by whom, what their number is, the original holder of the land, what rank they were in the army. And then on the second page, you can see again who gets that land, the amount of acres, and the location there. So sometimes, again, not as super detailed information, but this is available on Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition, where I can search through some of the bounty land warrants. And then homestead, so like we just saw with the other patent that my ancestor had, there's something called homestead. So the Homestead Act of 1862 was first signed by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862. So people were given 160 acres of land if they had maintained 5 years of continuous residence on that land, if they improved the land, if they filed an application, they paid their filing fee, and then filed for the deed of title. They had some certain requirements in order to be a homesteader, like they had to be 21 or older. They had to have never taken up arms against the US, which included those freed slaves, the women, and the immigrants who had filed for the Declaration of Intention. So they were able to be homesteaders as well. The homestead process generates what's called a land entry case file. What's great about these case files is that they exist even for those who didn't end up completing all the requirements or the whole process. And actually about 60% of the people never completed the whole entire process, but you can still see, oh, they started improving this land, or this is where they lived for 3 years before they decided to move, or they figured out the soil wasn't as great for whatever they wanted to farm, so they decided not to complete the process. There's a link in your handout for the National Archives, which tells you how you can order some of these case files. There are a couple of case files as well on Ancestry for the United States and Canada, and Family Search as well. Of course, other than this 1862 Act, there are other homestead acts. So you want to know which one that your ancestor would have filed under to tell you what they received, what the requirements were, et cetera, et cetera. If you have a question online, feel free to type it into the chat or the Q&A box and I can take a look at it. Let's see. Someone says with meets and bounds, the deeds will specify the acres. So that's your question from earlier about meets and bounds and how you figure out the acres. How early did the records begin, assuming it was after the state was formed? So sometimes it was before the state. If it was a territory before it became a state, you can still see records under the territory. It's going to depend. Every state is going to be different. There's no uniform time period of when land records started for each of the states. All right, so here is an example of a homestead. Yep.
You're saying where the land records exist at, so say Brown County encompassed like 4 or 5 current counties back in the day. And if the original record was set up as Brown County, would it be at the current Brown County office?
Yes. Yes, so that's why you also need to know about the boundaries and, you know, what time period and when that boundary changed. So even if it's currently Outagamie County now, and it was Brown County at the time your ancestor lived here, you would still need to go to Brown County because that's the original boundary. So you'd go by that original boundary. So here's an example of a homestead. So I got this through the land entry file that I ordered from my ancestor because I saw on the patent he had gotten it through homestead. So I wanted to see. There's a lot more to this file. There's actually 49 pages to this whole file. This is just the first page. So just to quickly show you, you know, it says his name on here. It says the legal land description. So if I couldn't figure that out from the plat or from any of the other records I have, I've got it right here. And then just skimming through the file really quick, I'll show you what other kind of things they have in here. So you can see all this kind of stuff in here about him purchasing this land, how much he would have gotten it for, when he would have gotten it, where he would have had to travel to that specific land office to get it. So all these little pieces of paper describing his journey of homesteading this piece of land. So you can kind of go through each of these pieces of paper and see and learn a little bit more about what he would have done and how he would have improved this land and proven that he was eligible to get this land through his homestead. So again, this is a whole 49 pages. We're not going to go in depth in all of them, but you can see this is kind of an example of what one of these land entry files looks like. I got this through a researcher who I paid to go to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for me, because I'm not able to travel to Washington, D.C. very easily in Wisconsin. But you can order them directly from the National Archives. I've got some details on that for you a little bit later on. Or again, you can hire a researcher just like I did. Lots of people do that and will go retrieve records from the National Archives for you. But you can see all this kind of cool stuff and his signatures in here. I mean, there's the level of details that you get in these land entry files is going to depend on, you know, what things your ancestor had to prove and all these kinds of specific circumstances that they would have had to go through. But I don't want to spend all of the time going through all this, but just to show you an example of what one of those files looks like. See, there's a couple questions in here. Let's see. What does cash entry mean? Cash means that they paid cash for that land. It wouldn't be credit. So again, like we had just talked about, there's cash sales or credit sales. They would have paid cash for that land. See if there's other questions in here. How helpful is Google Earth for rural ancestors? You know, I haven't really tried it much with rural ancestors, but I would assume Google Earth works no matter what the address is, because Google has satellites all over the place and can show you what that land looks like. Google Earth is air view and Maps is street level wise. Yes, or you could do street level on Google Earth as well. What is range? That's just how they would lay out the land. So each township has, a township boundary and a range boundary to tell you exactly where that land is. Someone says, I have a location of where my parents rented in the 1950s, Route 1, Oakfield. Can you point me in the right direction? You would need a legal land description. Route 1 is just telling them where the mail goes at that point. So you need more information, like a land record that would have a legal land description to tell you where specifically they are on Route 1 in that area. What is the most interesting thing you found or learned from property records? I don't know how to answer that. There's so many interesting things. You just never know what kind of little nuggets you're going to find. Probably one of the most coolest thing was I found some deeds and I found out that possibly it was how my second great grandparents met was through this land deed. So her family had owned the land and sold it to his family. And I was like, well, this happened like a year before they were married. Maybe that's how they met and married, or maybe the families knew each other at that point, or maybe that's just how they got a chance to meet and become husband and wife then.
Relatives in the deed, it says that she is allowed to live on the land until she dies.
Yeah.
And he has to pay for any medical or anything.
Yeah.
For her, and that was in the deed.
Yeah, so sometimes in the deeds you can see things like, oh, stipulations that they might have on selling the land, things like that. Someone says one of their ancestors served in the New York militia during War of 1812, and he moved the family to northern Illinois. A son moved to northeast Missouri and served in the Civil War. Later, they moved to Pike County, Illinois. I can find no reason he would have made such a move unless maybe his father had bounty land in Pike County, Illinois, and gave it to him. How might I research this? Look at bounty land records. So again, those are available on Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition. You can see if there's records specifically for Pike County, Illinois, or start at Family Search Wiki through the Illinois tab, or Illinois Land and Property, and then see specifically, how people would have obtained land. Look at other land records. So we're going to dive into all the deeds and all that stuff in just a minute to see what land records are available. Someone said, to clarify, immigrants arriving in 1852 would not have been homesteaders as the act had not been signed yet. I don't believe so. So as far as I remember, the first Homestead Act was 1862. So unless they had proven after that act was signed in 1862 that, hey, we've made improvements since 1852 or since 1855 or whatever, they possibly could have still gotten homestead. I'm not sure all the ins and outs of homestead and how they would have had to prove, or if they had been on the land before homestead officially went into place. Any questions from you guys in person before we move on? Time always flies when I'm here, I tell you. All right, we're going to talk all about the different types of land records, and I'm going to show you some examples. So these are some things that you might be able to find online for some of those ancestors of yours. So patents, that's the thing that didn't load on the government website that I was showing you before. So patent is official document transferring ownership of land from the federal government for the first time. So if you find your ancestor in a patent, it means that they were the first person after the federal government to own that piece of land. It is essentially a final receipt for them having gotten that piece of property. Once that patent is issued, for the first time, the land then becomes part of private or individual sector. And so if your ancestor owned that land afterwards, they would have gotten it through the form of a deed. So if they weren't the first person who owned that piece of land, you're not going to find them in the patent. You're going to find whoever owned it in the patent. Some information you can find in the patent would be the name of the person, what land office they would have gotten it from, that legal description of the land, what county, the date of the patent, which it could be several months after the final certificate is going to be issued for this patent. And then the signature of the sitting president. So before 1833, you actually get that actual president's signature. So if you happen to have an original patent before 1833, it's probably worth a little chunk of change. After 1833, it's somebody who is a designated official signing on behalf of the president. The original patents are going to be held by the landowner. So if you, again, have received one of those patents from your ancestor, you know, that's something cool to have. But you can also get copies through that General Land Office website that I showed you a few minutes ago. So this is what I was trying to get to load, but did not load. So this is what a patent looks like. It's a little bit longer than this. So this is just the top half of it. So this is John Keeble's patent, which is what I was trying to pull up. So it just says, you know, he's getting this piece of land. I've got a legal land description right here of the land. I've got his application number, his homestead certificate number, which is helpful to have when you are ordering that homestead land case file that I was just showing you before that was 40-some pages. This is the information you're going to need to get that from the federal government. If we scroll down on the patent, now I can see where, you know, Benjamin Harrison is going to sign it, but not really, because this is 1892. So this is somebody signing on behalf of Benjamin Harrison, who was the president at the time. So not a whole ton of information other than the name of my ancestor and their legal land description. But again, I'm going to use this data to get that actual case file to figure out more about his homestead process. So that's that whole thing that I just showed you that was 49 pages. But because he was the first person who owned the land, he's getting the patent. I know nobody else had settled on that land prior to him. Now deeds, again, after the person has the patent, they can sell their land, and they usually do that through a deed. So again, this is probably going to be the most common record that you're going to find in land records. So the deed transfers property from one person to another. And again, it's done if they are not the first person to own the land. There are many types of deeds, too many to go through all in depth. And to try to understand what they all mean, I recommend using Google or the Law Dictionary. We talked about the Law Dictionary and how there's a website for it, Black's Law Dictionary, when we talked about court records and probate records. So you can type in things like partition deed or quitclaim deed or whatever it says on the top of the page, what type of deed it is, to tell you, okay, this is what that means. So when you see something like quitclaim deed, it says that's the type of deed that releases a claim to property by one person to another. Or if you see warranty deed, that means the grantor warrants a good title to the property. So again, there's too many of these deed types to go through and too little time that we have. So if you find a deed and what type of deed it is, you can go ahead and Google that or use the Law Dictionary to figure out what does that even mean. Some information that you can find on deeds, it's going to be the name of the grantee or the person buying the land, or also the grantor who is selling the land. You're going to get a description of that land. You're going to get the acreage, how much they would have received, the dates, of course, that this transaction is happening. Sometimes you get bordering neighbors, you get witnesses, you get the previous owner's names, you get what type of deed it is or the authority. You get signatures of those people. Something to keep in mind with deeds is they might be indexed, they might be partially indexed, they might be completely unindexed. It depends on each state and how they, have their records, if they've digitized them or not, if they're still available offline. They might have an alphabetical listing by surname or by first name, or they may be chronological, or they may be by neighborhood. Again, it's going to be a mixed bag depending on where you're searching, what time period you're searching. Thankfully, though, a lot of them have been coming online as of late, and Family Search has made it a lot easier to search some of these deeds that aren't fully indexed with this new fancy thing called full text search feature. So we looked at this a little bit last month when we looked at probate records. So you can try searching for your ancestor in this. try searching different spellings of names, because the AI who is trying to read this handwriting could get it wrong. So to get to this, you're going to sign into your Family Search account. If you don't have one, go ahead and create a free one. It's going to be really handy for you to have one. Once you're signed in, there's a special little area you need to go to. Kind of on this homepage, if you scroll down, there's a spot that says Family Search Labs. You're going to click on View Experiments. And there's a spot that says expand your search with full text. I have it turned on already, so if you haven't turned it on yet, it'll have this little blue try it button. But once you've turned it on, you can just click go to experiment. And now I can search within here. You can read a little bit more about this. It's kind of giving you a couple of little tips and tricks here and telling you, right here, you can see kind of what collections are in here. So they're constantly adding more and more collections. But basically what you do is you can put in the keyword or a name of a person. So for example, I can put in my ancestor. Well, I've got 4 million results. So maybe I want to put in a place here. So I'm going to put in Wisconsin because I know my ancestor lived in Wisconsin. You can put in a year or range of years. And now I've got a little bit narrow of results. I can see here, oh, this is a probate estate case file. Oh, here's a deed right here. So I can go ahead and click on it. And now this is an actual deed that is my ancestor here. So you can see it says right here what the date is, who the parties are. So you can see Emergency and Levi, her husband of Shiocton. They're selling to this person for the cost of $300. And then this is the legal description. So like we had showed earlier when we talked about the different survey types, this one's giving me, instead of that kind of northwest quarter of the southeast quarter, this is giving me a lot number. So it's saying lot 7 of block 10 in Shiocton. So now I need to go to a plat map and figure that out to where that would be. So then down here, I can see again, their signatures are down here because they are legally selling this land. And I get, again, what date it's recorded in and all that fun stuff. So now I can go through and go through all the different deeds that are in here and see what other records I can find on them. You're also going to find probate records like we saw last month, or other deeds in here as well. So you can see it's kind of highlighting on the page those little keywords that I put over here in this search box. So again, I'd kind of do some various spellings over here or get creative with your searches to make sure you're getting the most stuff. Any questions about using this full text thing? It's awesome because it's trying to read the handwriting without people actually having to read the handwriting. They keep adding more and more stuff on here. Like I said, not everything is on here at this point. Like I think I was trying to search for my Oconto County ancestors with land records and I didn't see them on here, but they had some probate records on here already. So would people from Canada be able to purchase homestead? Yes, there were homesteaders in Canada. You can find some of those records on Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition. So I know I had some Canadian ancestors who I was able to find their homestead records in Canada on Ancestry Library Edition. If you have the paid version of Ancestry, you do need to have the world for that. Let's see. My ancestors were a fam. I don't know what that means. AFAM. If the person they purchased the land from has a BLM file, would it say the race of the person? Ancestor purchased land in 1845. I don't think they usually included the race in there on land records. You're gonna have to look at other records like census records usually would have the race of a person on there. Not land records usually. Usually you'll get things related to the land. People from Canada who settled in Wisconsin, someone who might have served in the Revolutionary War. I'm not sure what you're asking, Sue. Are you asking still about homestead records? People from Canada be able, okay, so there were certain requirements. If they came from Canada and tried to homestead in Wisconsin, they would have had to have proven residency and done all the things depending on what Homestead Act they would have applied under. But yes, they would have been eligible after a certain amount of time, even if they were immigrants. Like they would have had to file that declaration of intention, things like that, be over the age of 21, all kinds of things. Black person. Yeah, so I don't think on land records, possibly, I'm not sure. I personally haven't, researched any African-American land records, so I'm not sure if they specifically say what race they are in there. If they are a race other than white, I personally do not know. Has anybody dealt with races other than white when dealing with land records at this point? Perhaps anybody in the chat, if you have, feel free to chime in, but unfortunately, I don't have any experience on my own. All right. What's some of these tabs here? So again, try searching different spellings in this full text because it's AI, it's artificial intelligence. It's not a real human reading this. So they might get it wrong. Like I found records, like you can see right here, her name is Emerency, but it's got like a, gosh, what is the word for that? It's got a parentheses. That's what it is. My brain is already on Thanksgiving, guys. But it's got a parentheses instead of an E for her first name is Emerency with an E. It's got a parentheses instead of an E. So the computer can only read so much at this point. It's getting better and better and smarter. But of course, keep trying multiple different ways to find all of those records. All right. So the other types of land records, we looked at one earlier when I showed you that land entry case file. So this is going to be a whole packet or a whole file containing all the paperwork associated with a specific land sale. So you can see different documents in here, like I kind of skimmed through the first 20 pages or so of that land entry case file for my homesteading ancestor. But what kind of things you're going to see in there, how detailed they are, depends on the time period, depends on how the land was purchased, or how it was received through whatever act that they would have received it under. I have not personally found these in mine, but sometimes you can find copies of a person's naturalization documents in these because they would have needed to prove, hey, I meet this requirement, I'm a naturalized citizen. I've also heard of people getting birth records in there or information like their person's birth date, their birthplace, what military rank, their enlistment information. So the level of detail you're going to get in there is going to depend on your ancestor's individual land and how they would have needed to obtain the land or what they were eligible for. So I personally haven't seen these things in the land entry case files that I have, but hopefully you'll get lucky and that will give you some of this great genealogical information in those land entry case files. Again, packets exist for complete transactions as well as those incomplete ones. So if they kind of only made it through part of the way of that homesteading and then decided to go somewhere else and homestead somewhere else or buy land somewhere else, they would still have an incomplete file, saying, oh, they abandoned homestead or whatever, or they sold it to so-and-so. Like some of my Canadian homesteaders, I saw they started homesteading and then they said, well, the land isn't what we thought it was. It's not as easy to farm here as we thought. So after 2 years, they gave up and moved somewhere else. So I still have that incomplete file because even though they officially didn't get that homestead on that piece of land, they still lived there and worked there for 2 years or whatever it was. You can again order these through the National Archives. It is $50 a file. You don't know how big or how small the file is. It's going to be only for those federal land states, so those 30 states kind of on the western part of the United States that you can get these. Again, I've got a link for you in your handout that tells you all about these different land entry case files, what is in there, what states are in here, how do you find these records, what information you need in order to request these records. If you want to order them through the National Archives for that $50, you need the name of the land office. the land description that has that township, that range, that section. You need the final certificate number or the patent number, the authority in which the land was acquired. So like the Homestead Act of 1862. That's all information that you can find on that Bureau of Land Management site that we looked at earlier, where I found that land patent that didn't always load. But it does, say it on that patent that we looked at a little bit ago. Again, the alternatives of you going to Washington, D.C. or paying the $50 for each file is you could get a Washington, D.C. based researcher to perhaps go get these files for you. Like for me, I had like 5 or 6 that I wanted to get. Well, it was cheaper to hire a researcher than it was to pay $50 for each of the files from the National Archives. So, and I couldn't go to Washington, D.C. myself, or I didn't want to wait until I can go to Washington, D.C. So I hired a researcher. They've got a whole listing of researchers who will search at the National Archives through the National Archives website, where you can go find a researcher there and inquire about their fees and what rates are and stuff. So I've got that link for you in your handout. Something else, we already looked at a plat map when we looked at the legal land description, and I showed you that Bovina, Wisconsin one. But plat maps show land divisions and sometimes the landowner names. Many of the older ones have thankfully been digitized and are available online. So you can check websites like the Library of Congress, Digital Public Library of America. Family Search has a really great digital library where they've gotten some digitized. You can find some on Ancestry, or there might be local sites like library sites or historical societies. So what I usually do is I just do a Google search. So I search something like Outagamie County, Wisconsin plat map, and I can see, oh, here's a site that has some plat maps. Here's a plat book for this county. Here's an atlas for that county. So I can then go explore these records and see if it happens to be in the time period that I'm looking for my person. You can also still find some historic plat maps, usually in kind of a book form or a map form at local libraries. Most places aren't printing new plat maps. So like if you're looking for who owned the land in 2020, they really aren't printing plat maps anymore. Those are usually available online through the county website. So you can now see them electronically who owns the land at this point. Us at the library, we have a really great plat map index that indexes 4 of our historic Outagamie County plat maps. So I'll just show you a quick demonstration of what this looks like. But you can see down here, we've got the years of 1889, 1917, circa 1928, 7 to 28, and 1942. So these are all included in this index. What we've done, because sometimes plat maps you'll see they might only give a first initial or abbreviation of a first name, we've gotten fields over here that says last name begins with or first name begins with. So you can start typing in a name and it's going to give you some suggestions. So I'm starting to type in Thompson and I can see I can select that. And instead of putting it, I can put in Nathan, but it might not be an option here. Like Nathaniel is an option, but maybe I think my ancestors might be an initial. So I can put in an N over here if I know his name starts with it. His first name starts with an N, and I can click search. And so now I can see a result. We looked at the Bovina plat before from 1889. So this tells me what range, what township, what page, and what section number. And then it actually has a link to this book. So now I can click on it, pull up the book from 1889, go in here and look at it. So looking back at here, I'm looking for page 29. No, this is going to be in my way here. I want page 29. So here's page 29 right here in Bovina. I can click this little magnifying glass to get a bigger view of it, and I can zoom in. And now I know I'm looking for section 35. So you can see again, the section number is kind of right in the middle. So I can see right here, section 35. And then here's N.N. Thompson, that's my ancestor. So now I can see where his land is in this 1889 plat map because we've indexed it for you Instead of you having to search through all the different maps to see where in this little square he is, we point you right to where the section is. We've also got atlases. These are kind of alternatives to plat maps or in addition to plat maps. So you might find them available through the Family Search Digital Library. You might even find land records transcribed or compiled in a book form here. So if you go to the digital library here, so right on Family Search, there's an area where you click on search, and then where it says books, this is where their digital library is. So I can type in something specific like Maryland land records. And wait for it to load. And wait for it to load. There we go. So I can see, oh, look at, here's a book that says Maryland Early Settlers Land Records. So I can click on it and get access to it and then skim through this book just like I'm looking at it in the library. But they've also got maps in here sometimes, or atlases, all kinds of different things that you might find in here. So just kind of skim through the results and see what kind of stuff you might be able to find on that location that you're looking for. Also check other sites. So there's the Library of Congress, there's the Digital Public Library of America, there's Ancestry, either the paid or library edition, where they have a whole map, atlas, and gazetteer collection. Of course, those local sites like the libraries, the genealogy societies, different archives, or you can just do a Google search. Like we looked at earlier, I typed in Outagamie, Wisconsin, plat map. You can see what kind of results are there that would be available to you. There's also a map collection through David Rumsey, who is a very famous map guy, who has all these different kind of maps here. So you can, again, search through these or browse through them. You can even look at the text on the maps. So, you know, you can type in Maine, and it will bring you all the different results of maps that might deal with that name or that state. So there's all kinds of different results here. You can also use these filters over here to kind of narrow it down. So sometimes you might not get as relevant a results, or like you have 1,300 results, you want to narrow them down. You can use this over here on the left-hand side to kind of click on the little options to say, okay, this is really what I want. And then when you find something, you can go ahead and click on it and be able to view it. Once it loads. I don't know why it's not loading for me today. It's just not playing nice, but hopefully when you're home, it'll load a little bit faster and you can actually see all the different things on there. But those are just some of the sites that you can use. Again, just search by that location that you're looking for and see what's available online. There are, of course, lots of other land records. We would take the rest of all afternoon to talk about all the different kinds. But there might be things like mortgages and leases and different agreements or tax records somebody mentioned earlier. There's different surveys, different track books, lots of other things. I've got some really great resources in your handout, or again, you can start at Family Search Wiki for that specific location, like, you know, Wisconsin land records or Germany land records, to learn more about what record types they might have in that location or what is easily available to you online. Do we have questions before we move on to the last little section we've got, where I'm going to show you how you find that land where it is now? Someone said, does the real text experiment only check Family Search records and not the whole internet? Yes, it is only Family Search, and right now it's only land records, probates and wills, and a couple international things, like I think from Australia and I forget where else, but they're continually adding more and more records. You're just gonna kind of have to keep checking back, and hopefully maybe other sites will eventually adopt that same technology. But for right now, it's just Family Search and what's available in certain collections. Any other questions before we talk a little bit more about how to locate some land records and where to find that address? Yeah.
On the one where the person said that they just had a real route number in Oakfield,
Yes.
could they check with the post office and get determined like where that route
I'm
was?
not sure if the post office would know what a rural route would be at a certain time period. You can try. I don't know personally. Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I've always looked at land records, gotten that legal land description, popped it into my little site I'm going to show you in a few minutes, and then gotten that actual address of where it is. So, but it's worth a shot if you are looking at a rural area and you just have that route number. You can try checking with the post office. But like I said, I've always looked at land records and gotten that legal land description. So it's easy for you to find a plat map or something that you can figure out that legal land description. With so many of the deeds digitized on Family Search, you can possibly try to find that as well. All right. So what records are available, how to access them, again, depends on where you're researching, what time period. Each state is going to vary, of course. Again, I recommend starting with that Family Search Wiki. Learn about what land records are available, what digital collections they have online. Again, many states have been putting their stuff online, making them easily accessible on the main genealogy sites that we've looked at, like Ancestry, Family Search, or they might have a statewide archive site that has some land records, things like that. Or of course, local libraries, genealogy societies, historical societies, all those kinds of places. This is a snapshot of what the Ancestry Library Edition looks like. So they have about 200 US and international collections for land records. Remember, unfortunately, you can only access this library edition in the library. Well, APL is closed right now for the next foreseeable future until we reopen back downtown. You can access the library edition at any other InfoSoup library. So you can go to Kimberly or Kaukauna or Little Chute. You can even go to Neenah or Menasha. Any Wisconsin library actually would get you access, even if you don't have a library card there. One collection I really wanted to point out that's in the library edition, it's also in the paid edition, is this indexed county land ownership maps from 1860 to 1918. So there you can find a lot of these kind of plat maps and other types of maps that will find those legal land descriptions for you, and then be able to open up the door on all kinds of other records that you would have. But again, they've got lots of other international ones. So like for me, I have a paid version of Ancestry, but I don't have the world edition. So those Canadian homestead people, I looked them up when I was at the library for free instead of paying for the world edition. So do what you need to do, but that's how I do it. Of course, the paid edition does have a lot more collections than the library edition though. So I'm going to show you just a quick demo here of the paid edition. They've got 399 international and US collections. Again, you do need that world access though if you're going to access any of these international ones, or try to get them freely at the library. But how to get them in the paid edition is, of course, you would go to ancestry.com. You would go to search. I like to always go to card catalog because I'm a librarian. That's how my brain thinks. So right here on the left-hand side, we've got some filters here. So there's ones for maps, atlases, and gazetteers, which we talked about earlier, where you can find some of those map resources, things like that. They've also got a spot here that says court, land, wills, and financials. So you can click on that. And then there's a spot for land records where you can click on that and see what's available. So I can see all the different types of resources they have here. I can sort it by date. I can sort it by collection title, record count, things like that. Again, if I click on any of these international ones, it's going to say, oh, look, I can search this maybe, but then I put in my ancestor's name and I click search and it's going to give me this. And it's like, oh, it's all blurred out. Well, you try to click on view image and it's going to say, hey, we want more money. it says, nope, you need to pay $113, which no thanks. So that's what happens when you try to click on an international one when you don't have the world subscription. But of course, any of these US-based ones you can click on and search. You can even narrow it down. Like if I just want to look at Wisconsin ones, I can type in Wisconsin over here, click on search. And you can see there's a couple US-based ones that might have some Wisconsin records in here. Or I can see if there's other, like here's a Wisconsin homestead and cash entry patents pre-1908. So I can click in here and I can search my ancestor's name, click on search, and then see what's available in here and click on a record and see. Sometimes it's just an index and doesn't give you an actual physical image of it, but you still got that legal land description. You've still got some great data to go off of to learn a little bit more about that land through other land records. So again, lots of stuff on Ancestry, both the paid edition and the library edition that you can explore. Heritage Quest, that's available for free from home for all Wisconsin residents. You don't even need a library card. If you do have a library card, you can pop in your library card number if it asks for it from home, or you can just select Wisconsin and pop in your zip code. They do have some maps and some land-related records, like we had talked about boundaries before. They've got that great census map guide that shows the different boundaries and how they change throughout the year, so you can see what Wisconsin looks like in 1850, what it looks like in 1840, what it looks like in 1900, and see how the boundaries change from county to county. Because again, if at the time your ancestor purchased that land, if it was part of one county and it's now part of a different county, you want to go back to that original home county where it was at that time to find those land records. On Heritage Quest, they also have a Revolutionary War pension and bounty application files here. So you can see some other maps and other things that they have related to the United States. Family search, like we looked at earlier through that digital library, they've got things like this where you can see that whole book. So I'm not going to go through it again. I guess I forgot that I put this in later, so we're not going to do a demo of it again. But I will show you there's other spots other than that full text area where you can search. So one other way to search is by going here and going to records. You can, of course, put your ancestor's name in here and narrow it down to different land records. You can go over here under the Find a Collection and type in land records and see, oh, they've got some Alaska ones, they've got some Australia ones, they've got some Belgium ones. Sometimes, you know, it looks like it's going to be a land record, and then you read it, it's like, oh, that's actually a church record because it has the word land in it somewhere. So maybe you want to just type land in there, but you're going to get things like Queensland and all kinds of things like that. So sometimes it's not always the best way to search. There's also an area where you can search by place. So I can type in Wisconsin here. And now I can see all the different things they have for Wisconsin. If I want to just see all the Wisconsin ones here, I can see all the different Wisconsin-based resources that they have here. Over here on the right-hand side, I can see if there's one related to land. There's one related to probate and court, but I'm not seeing a land record one. Some other places that might have some land records might have it listed here. It's just Wisconsin doesn't have any specific land record ones available. One other spot you can check is through the stuff that's not indexed. So if you go to search and click on images, this is where you'd want to enter, again, a place. So I could type in like Illinois, or I can be more specific and type in Cook County or Chicago, whatever way you want to go in. Then over here on the right-hand side, again, we've got some filters here. There's a spot that says life event. This is where you want to select property. So they've got different deeds and indexes and land records here. You got to be sure to click this little update button in the bottom right corner though, so it updates for you. And now I can see, oh, here's some plat records from Macon County, Illinois, or some land records and directories for Livingston County, Or again, I can narrow it down by a specific county. If I'm like, hey, I really want Cook County, click that. And now I can see all these deeds related to Cook County. So again, you can feel free to browse and explore and go down the rabbit hole if you aren't able to find it using those full text things or some of the other things we've talked about today. Let's see if there's any questions in here. Someone says sometimes plat maps were printed with rural route numbers. So that's another option to check those plat maps and see if you can figure out the rural location where your ancestor would have lived. Someone also says the National Archives cartography section has a few rural route maps. Postmasters in rural areas were supposed to send them in. I saw one done on brown paper, like you used to see packages wrapped in, done with crayons. Maybe the postmaster was not pleased to do the map, so he did not make it with pen. Because of the wax, it could not be copied in their big duplicator. Wow, how interesting. You never know what you're gonna find or what kind of method they use to record that. Is Heritage Quest free in other states? You would have to check your state and what the access is for your state. Check your local libraries. That's usually going to be where you're going to be able to access it through. Us in Wisconsin, we are fortunate to have something called BadgerLink, which provides it for free for every person in Wisconsin. If you are using the library edition, will you see that it's not available, but it would be in the paid edition, or will you only see what is not available? Sometimes in the library edition, they will have it kind of blurred out, like you saw when I tried to click on that London thing, and it will say, oh, you have to pay to get access to this. So even in the library edition, they do kind of make you think like you can access it and then demand the money to access it. Is there a handout? Yes, there was a link. Let's see, here we go. All right, let's get to the end here. Again, not everything is online, just like everything else we've talked about every single session up to this point. If you can't find stuff online, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just might not be indexed. You still want to search the grantee and grantor indexes. So again, the buyer and seller indexes. You can find your ancestor listed in one of those columns. Write down what deed book, what page, what date, the names of the people that are going to be included in that. So again, grantee is that person who is buying that property or receiving that property. Grantor is the one who's selling it. So look in both of those indexes because your ancestor is going to buy stuff and they're going to sell stuff. They're going to be featured in both. Generally, if you're searching offline, the county clerk or the Register of Deeds office is usually going to be that place in the county where they're going to house those land records. Or they might be in a state archive or some other similar repository. So again, that's why I always start with that Family Search Wiki, searching that location to see how I access that stuff online, and then it'll let you know where to access it offline as well. The really important thing is you need to know what county that land is in. Again, be aware there may be more than one of those town names or those city names with the same name. So some examples, Maple Grove, Wisconsin, you might see that and think, oh, that's Manitowoc County. But there's also one in Shawano County and Barron counties. And that's just 3 of them that I knew about off the top of my head. So there could be more than 3 Maple Groves in Wisconsin. So you need to know specifically what county, or you'll be searching multiple counties to try to find that land record. Again, remember those boundary changes. So for example, Outagamie County, where we are in Appleton, was created in 1851 from Brown County in Winnebago County. So Outagamie County land records prior to 1851 could be in Brown County or they could be in Winnebago County. So you need to know those boundary changes. Again, Heritage Quest has a really great resource, or there's also the Map of US website, which we talked about, I think when we talked about city directories or church records. I can't remember which session it was. We talked about it and I showed you an example of how to do it. But it's really simple to figure out those boundary changes. I personally always go to Heritage Quest. I think it's the easiest. Again, the majority of the time, in order to access property records, it's helpful or sometimes always necessary to know that legal description of the land, which is why we spent a little bit of time talking about legal descriptions, how to figure them out, how to translate them, all that fun stuff. Federal land, again, many of those records are going to be available through the National Archives because it's federal. So they have that National Archives in Washington, D.C. They also have some regional hubs throughout the United States. You want to see their website for some details on how to request the records, what's available, and where it's available. Some states also have some online databases for you through local websites for more recent land records. So like I mentioned earlier, they're not really printing any plat maps anymore. But like for us in Outagamie County, Wisconsin, we've got this whole area of our county website that has all these different property search tools and areas where you can search all the different land records and plat books and all that kind of fun stuff that would be more current land records, of course. So a county that you're looking for where your ancestor lived might be similar. So you might be wondering at this point, well, how do I even figure out if my ancestor owned land or not? So a couple places you can check before you start diving into those land records. We talked about census records way towards the beginning of the year, but census records can give you a hint. Several of the records asked if your ancestor owned or rented, what the value of their real estate was. So those can kind of give you a little bit of clue as to, hey, they owned land in this area at this time period. Let me look and see specifically when they got that land and all that kind of information through the land records. You can look at your previous research. So maybe their probate record, which we talked about last month, would discuss land and what land they owned at the time of their death. City directories, which we talked about earlier this year, they sometimes have little symbols or little abbreviation, like you might see H for homeowner or R for renter. Well, if you know they're renting it, you know you're not going to find a land record because they don't own it. They're just renting a room or that home where they are at that point. Newspapers, of course, we talked about earlier this year. They might list land transactions between people because that's something legally they needed to post. Again, check plat maps, which we looked at for the area where they live to see if you can find where they are on the plat. Sometimes you just need to find, the area in the websites that I showed you, like Family Search, and just do that name search in that full text search and see, or search those indexes in that location where your ancestor lives. See if you can find them in those records and get lucky. One thing to note, though, is just because they owned land in a specific place doesn't mean they necessarily lived on that land, especially if they were farming. They might have owned land in multiple different places and only lived on one specific place and then farmed the rest of the land. Usually on a plat map or some of the land records, you might see like a little spot where the house was indicated to see, oh, they did live on there, or there was a house on this piece of land. So now what we asked about earlier, how do I figure out where this land is today? If all I have is that legal land description, and I have no clue where this is at this point. So you can go to this Randy Majors site, which is an awesome site. They've got lots of different map tools here for you, where you can go to the section, township, and range, and you can pop in that information here. So if you scroll down here, you can see there's a little section area here. I can pop in section 35, township, I think it was 22 north and 16 east, if I remember correctly. And I can select what state it is for Wisconsin, and I can click go. Now it's gonna magically bring me to where it is. So now I can see the whole section, but now remember, I gotta remember, oh, it's the southwest quarter of the northeast quarter or whatever it is. So I gotta kind of zoom in and kind of use my brain a little bit to figure out what street it's going to be by. But I can see right here, oh, here's State Road 76 and Grandview Road. So now I know the house was kind of in this area, for example. You can also use a little satellite image. So right up here, it'll give you a satellite image and you can see, oh, this is farmland at this point. Like maybe my ancestors just owned this and was farming it, or maybe they took the house down depending on how long it's been. Or you can see, oh, look at, here's the house right here. And I know it's off Grandview Road or whatever it is. So it's that simple. All you need is that section, that township, that range, and select that state, pop it in, and you get right there in that general vicinity of where they lived. Any questions about doing that? It's just that simple. All right, I've got a couple resources for you to learn some more information, because of course I can only talk so much. I've already talked for over an hour and a half. We've got this great book through the library. It's older, it's from 1997, which feels like forever ago. But this talks a lot about the history of pre-United States land, talks about how to research in those state land states, how to research in those federal land states more in depth. They've also got a special section on Native American land and land office boundary maps for each of the federal land states. We don't have a copy here at the library, but you can put it on hold. Right now, you'd have to pick it up at a different location anyway. So if you put it on hold, you can go to Kimberly and pick it up, or Kokano, or Little Chute while we are closed, or of course, wait till next year when we are reopened and pick it up at APL. We've also got another great book called Locating Your Roots. Again, it's a little bit older. It's a little newer than the last one. This one's from 2003. But it has lots of great information on the various ways that you can obtain land. Because of course, I could only go through so many. There's lots of different circumstances where your ancestor could have obtained land. They've also got a really great locality resource in the back of the book for each state. So you can go and see Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a public land state. It was surveyed from the 4th principal meridian, and land records are at the county level in the office of the Register of Deeds, and it will tell you when the land office is opened for that specific location. Or I can look at Pennsylvania, which is one of the original 13 colonies, and it will tell me through how land was distributed in Pennsylvania, and it will give me a couple resources for Pennsylvania if I'm researching those Pennsylvania ancestors and I want to learn how to research their land records. So a great resource, again, that you can get through the library. All right, this was our last session of the year because of the holidays next month. It fallen on the wrong date for us to be able to meet. To be determined when our next session will be. We are actually going to relaunch this series and retitle it the Genealogy Jumpstart series. So we're going to offer it in person in the library and on Zoom. For those who have, attended the sessions all year or maybe missed a few earlier this year, we are going to repeat some of the sessions that we did this year, but I'm also going to do some new sessions that you who have attended these last few months have not seen. So feel free to join us. As soon as I have the official go-ahead to let you all know the dates and the topics, and when we know the library is reopened, those will be on our events calendar at apl.org. You can just click on calendar and it will bring you all the listing of all the programs that we're going to have at the library, or again, sign up for my monthly newsletter where I will send out information as soon as I can on what our topics will be, what our dates will be. At this point, don't plan on it before February, because even if we open in January, I need a little time to get settled in before I can give a presentation again. Our Find Your Ancestors series is still going to go on. So we have our December session on December 14th on Zoom. That will be all about researching your ancestors' medical history. So we have a professional genealogist who's going to talk to us about how to do that. And then in January, we're going to do our session a little bit later on January 25th, still at 2 p.m. Central. And that's going to be all about how to write an ancestor sketch. So like a little kind of mini biography on your ancestor. If you're looking at how to kind of pass on stuff to future generations, maybe write a little sketch on your ancestor and put those in a book. So we have Thomas McGinty who's going to be teaching us that. Depending on if the library is open, we might be able to host people in person, but Thomas will be virtual. Or if the library is not open by that point, we'll of course do it on Zoom. So again, stay tuned for when we will reopen, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I do not have a date at this point. But yeah, thank you to everyone who's joined us this year. I'm happy to take any questions or anything. I've got a survey if you don't mind filling it out. The library loves to hear if you're enjoying things or not. And it gives us, motivation to keep offering this in the future. So, yeah.
In the 1800s especially, did railroads keep track of the people that rode on them. So could I tell if an ancestor rode a train from New York to Nebraska?
So in the 1800s, could you tell if your ancestor rode a train from a certain area? I do not know that off the top of my head. A couple years ago, we did have a great railroad travel program that is still on our YouTube channel. If you go there, it was given by Bob Lettenberg, who is from the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay. So if you go to our YouTube channel, we've got a whole playlist of Find Your Ancestors and of course this series. But if you go to the Find Your Ancestors one, there's going to be one over here. Let's see what it's called. Coming to America by Train. So you can learn a little bit more. I don't remember off the top of my head, specifically in the 1800s, if you could find a passenger list like that. But he might talk to you about some other resources that would help kind of fill in the blanks or learn a little bit about what travel was like at that time period. Let's see what kind of questions we've got here. I can send the chat to you if you are interested in the chat. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you. Can you request a copy of previous handouts? Absolutely. Send me an email. My email address, I will pop it right here in the chat, kstilp@apl.org. Yes, someone pointed out some of them were so full, they wish they were in 2 separate sessions. I am taking that into account next year. So some sessions, like the vital records, I am pulling into 2 different sections. So some months we will have more than one session. It's not always going to be on the 4th Tuesday. We will stay with the Tuesday 1 o'clock time, but sometimes we'll have 2 sessions in 1 month. So you get extra of me if you really want. We are going to also record them. So if you can't attend us live or you don't want to join us in the library, you can join us via Zoom or watch the recording. We're posted on YouTube, of course. So, but yes, lots of them were jam packed. So I'm going to try to keep it down to an hour and a half or closer to an hour if I can. But you know, I just love to give as much information as I can. I can't help myself. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Does Family Search contain info from 20th and 21st century or just older information? It depends. They have different, record sets. Some of them are going to be more recent. Some of them is going to be older stuff. As far as land records, I don't know off the top of my head. It depends on each individual location. I've seen some stuff from the 1800s. I've seen some stuff from the 1900s. It's hard to say depending on that location, which is why I always start with the Family Search Wiki to see what is available through Family Search or other genealogy sites for digital collections. This was my first Zoom. Well, welcome. Can't wait to see what's on the agenda for next year. Yeah, so like I mentioned, we will repeat some of the ones that you might have missed earlier this year and I'll give you some new ones. Will this year's sessions be available on YouTube? Yes, all of the sessions that we've done up until this point are on YouTube. So again, right here is our YouTube channel. We've got this whole genealogy series for seniors where you can watch all of the past ones. The one from today will be on there later tonight for you. So you've got all 11 sessions right here. You can go back and refresh your brain if you missed any of them, or if you want to watch them over and over again. They will.
You can watch these from anywhere.
You can watch them from anywhere. If you've got a smart TV, you can even pull them up and watch them on your TV if you don't want to watch them on your computer or your iPad or whatever. So you can watch me in full definition. My email address is kstilp, so KSTILP @apl.org. Let's see, what else we got here? How do we request? I will send out the chat for all you virtual folks. I will send it out with a link to the recording tomorrow. So look for that in your email. It will come from Zoom. Where would deeds be if owner lived in another state? So what state are you looking at? So I would go to Family Search and start looking through the deeds there. Not every state is on Family Search, but that's the first place I would start, or start with the wiki. Even if the person was living in another state and purchased land from another state, those deeds would still be available. So either online or offline, depending on what time period, what location, and what the different restrictions are on those records. Any other questions from anybody, or any questions other than things related to land records? I'm happy to entertain while you've got me here. All right, well, thanks everybody. Feel free again to reach out to me via email if you have any questions. Even though the library is closed, I'm still available and working every day, so you can reach out to me anytime. And I will look forward and seeing you guys next year at the library when we're reopened. So thanks everyone.